Hey there, I'm Gus, and welcome to Mind Liberty. Today we're exploring a topic that might shake your perspective on the world, because the world you were born into, it's gone. Whether we like it or not, the pace of change we're living through is so rapid and so profound that the world we used to know has collapsed. And what's taking its place? Well, that's still up for debate. But one thing is for sure, understanding these changes could make the difference between thriving and merely surviving in the years ahead. This isn't just about politics or economics. It's about energy, demographics, technology, food, and everything in between. We're witnessing a systemic shift across the globe, one that used to unfold over centuries, but now it's happening within a few short years, sometimes even months. Buckle up, because today we're going to break down exactly what's happening, why it's happening, and, most importantly, what you can do to adapt. Stay with me, because by the end of this episode, you'll not only understand the forces reshaping our world, but also be better prepared for what's coming next. Let's start with the basics. You've heard it before. The world is changing. But what does that actually mean? For most of us, change means new gadgets, better tech, maybe a shift in politics. But that's just the surface. What we're seeing now are deep, structural changes that are shaking the foundations of how we live, work, and interact with the world. Take a moment and think about it. How many crises can you count happening right now? Energy shortages, inflation, political instability, wars, climate disasters. Each of these alone would be enough to cause concern. But the thing is, they're not happening in isolation. They're converging. And that's what makes this moment in history so dangerous, and at the same time, so transformative. In fact, the last time we saw changes this significant was during the period from 1905 to 1945. Think about that era. 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the collapse of empires, and the reshaping of global power. It was a period of unimaginable upheaval, and in many ways, it set the stage for the modern world. But the difference today? It's all happening much, much faster. What took decades then is taking years or even months now. And if we're not ready for it, well, things could get ugly. Let's talk about one of the biggest forces driving this transition: demographics. You see, for most of human history, populations grew steadily. More people meant more workers, more innovation, more consumers. It was the engine behind the Industrial Revolution, the post-war boom, and the rise of modern economies. But now, that engine is sputtering. Birth rates are dropping in almost every major economy. Populations are aging rapidly. And countries like Japan, Germany, and even China are facing the harsh reality that there simply aren't enough young people to support the old. Here in the US, we're lucky to have a somewhat stable population, but even that's starting to shift. And the effects of this demographic collapse? They're huge. Fewer workers mean less economic growth. Governments that promised pensions and health care to their aging populations are now scrambling to figure out how to pay for it all. And as populations shrink, cities start to hollow out. We're already seeing this in places like Detroit, where entire neighborhoods are empty, and the government is left holding the bag for infrastructure it can't afford to maintain. But here's where it gets really scary. Demographics aren't just about economics. They also have a direct impact on politics and social. Fewer young people mean fewer innovators, fewer soldiers, and fewer voters with long-term stakes in the future. And that brings us to the next major force reshaping the world: energy. Energy is the lifeblood of civilization. Without it, nothing works. No electricity, no transportation, no internet. And for most of the last century, we've been living in an energy-rich world, powered by cheap fossil fuels. But those days are numbered. The global energy system is in a state of crisis, and it's happening at the worst possible time. Look at what's happening right now. Oil prices are fluctuating wildly, natural gas is in short supply, and countries are fighting over access to renewable energy technologies. The war in Ukraine has made it clear that energy isn't just an economic issue, it's a geopolitical weapon. Russia's control over European gas supplies gives it enormous leverage over the West, and that's just the beginning. But even beyond the geopolitics, we're facing a much bigger problem: the end of cheap, abundant fossil fuels. The oil wells are running dry, And while renewables are making progress, they're not scaling fast enough to replace what we're losing. And when energy prices go up, everything gets more expensive. Food, transportation, manufacturing, you name it, it's tied to energy. And that brings us to a really critical point, because it's not just about energy. It's about what happens when energy, demographics, and technology all start to fail at the same time. And this is where things get interesting, and honestly, a little scary. Think about it. We've been told for years that we're living in the greatest technological age in history. But what if I told you that the pace of technological innovation is actually slowing down? Sure, we've got smartphones, electric cars, and artificial intelligence, but the real groundbreaking innovations, they're becoming. You see, for decades, we've been riding the wave of Moore's Law, the idea that computing power doubles every 2 years, and that's driven an incredible amount of progress. But guess what? We're approaching the limits of Moore's Law. Semiconductor technology is hitting a wall, and we're running out of ways to pack more power into smaller chips. On top of that, many of the big technological breakthroughs we've come to expect, like nuclear fusion or fully self-driving cars, are still decades away for sight. And without new technology to drive growth, the global economy is starting to stall. The productivity gains that powered the 20th century are drying up, and we're left wondering, what's next? And here's where the rubber meets the road. If technology is slowing down, and energy is becoming scarcer, and our populations are shrinking, what happens to the world economy? What happens to the global food system? What happens to cities, to countries, to us? Stick around, because I'm about to dig into what could be the most pressing crisis of all, the global food crisis. It's closer than you think, and the consequences could be devastating. All right, let's talk about food. Food is something we all take for granted. You go to the grocery store, grab what you need, and go home. But what if I told you that the global food system is on the brink of collapse? This isn't some distant future scenario. It's happening right now. You see, food production is tied to so many of the other crises we've talked about: energy, demographics, even technology. Let's start with energy. Modern agriculture is incredibly energy intensive. From tractors to fertilizers to transportation, every step of the food production process relies on cheap energy. And as energy prices rise, so do food prices. But it's not just energy. We're also facing a fertilizer crisis. Fertilizers are critical for growing the crops that feed the world, and a lot of them are made from natural gas. With gas prices soaring and geopolitical conflicts disrupting supply chains, fertilizer prices have gone through the roof. Farmers can't afford to plant as much, and when they do, the yields are lower. And then there's climate change. Droughts, floods, and unpredictable weather patterns are wreaking havoc on crops all over the world. The result? A global food shortage that could leave millions hungry and drive up prices for everyone. Now let's add one more layer to this: geopolitics. The war in Ukraine is a prime example. Ukraine is one of the world's largest exporters of wheat, and its crops feed millions of people in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. But with the war dragging on, those wheat exports have been severely disrupted. The result? Rising food prices and shortages in some of the world's most vulnerable regions. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what happens when people can't afford to eat. Historically, food shortages have been one of the leading causes of political instability, protests, and even revolutions. Just look at the Arab Spring. It was sparked in part by rising food prices. And if we're not careful, we could be looking at a global wave of instability driven by food insecurity. So, where does that leave us? We've got a world facing multiple crises: demographic collapse, energy shortages, technological stagnation, and now a food crisis. But it's not just about those individuals. It's about how they interact, how they reinforce each other, and how they're accelerating the collapse of the systems we rely on. And this brings us to a fascinating theory, one that helps explain why all of these crises seem to be happening at the same time. It's called structural demographic theory. Stick with me here, because this theory might just be the key to understanding the future of civilization. Alright, let's break this down. Structural demographic theory is a way of looking at the rise and fall of civilizations. It's a bit like the life cycle of a living organism. Civilizations go through periods of growth, stability, and decline. And according to this theory, We're currently in a period of decline, a time when multiple pressures are building up and threatening to tear society apart. One of the key drivers of this process is demographics. When populations are young and growing, economies thrive. There are more workers, more innovation, more consumption. But as populations age, that dynamic changes. Fewer young people means fewer workers, which means less economic growth. And as the population gets older, the government has to spend more on healthcare and pensions, leaving less money for everything else. At the same time, structural demographic theory also looks at how inequality and resource scarcity drive instability. As resources like energy and food become scarce, the gaps between teams, this creates social tensions, political instability, and ultimately collapse. We've seen this happen before. The Roman Empire, the Mayan civilization, the dynasties of China, they all went through similar cycles. They grew, they thrived, and then they collapsed. And the scary part? Many of the factors that contributed to those collapses, demographic shifts, resource scarcity, political instability, are happening right now on a global scale. But here's the big question. Are we doomed to repeat history, or can we break the cycle? Stick around, because in the next part of this video, I'm going to dive into the solutions. Yes, there are solutions, and while they're not easy, they might just be the key to navigating the collapse of the old world and building something new in its place. Okay, so we've talked about the crises we're facing, but now let's get to the good part, the solutions. Because while the world we were born into is collapsing, that doesn't mean we're helpless. In fact, this period of transition could be an opportunity for something better, but we need to act. First, we need to rethink energy. It's clear that fossil fuels are on their way out, and renewables are part of the solution, but they're not the whole answer. We need massive investments in energy storage, nuclear power, and energy efficiency. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be cheap, but the alternative is much, much worse. Think about energy like this. You might not be able to overhaul the global energy grid on your own, but there are steps you can take to reduce your personal energy consumption and even generate your own power. If you haven't already, consider investing in solar panels for your home. Yes, the upfront cost can be high, but the long-term benefits are significant. You're not just lowering your utility bills, you're making yourself more energy independent. And as energy prices rise and grids become less reliable, that independence is going to be worth its weight in gold. Think about it this way. During the massive blackouts in Texas a few years ago, homes with solar panels were able to keep the lights on when everyone else was left in the dark. Solar energy isn't just about saving money, it's about resilience. Beyond that, make sure you're using energy-efficient appliances, insulating your home properly, and minimizing waste. The less energy you use, the less you're dependent on external systems that might not always be reliable in the future. But energy isn't the only area where you can take action. Let's talk about food security. Now, I'm not suggesting you go full-on prepper mode and start stockpiling years' worth of canned goods, though hey, if that's your style, more power to you. But there are some smart, simple steps you can take to make sure you're less vulnerable to food shortages. First off, if you have the space, even a small balcony or a backyard, consider starting a garden. Now, I know not everyone has the time or space to grow a full vegetable patch, but even growing a few herbs, tomatoes, or leafy greens can make a difference. And beyond the obvious benefit of having fresh food at your fingertips, growing your own food gives you a sense of independence that's invaluable in uncertain times. There's also something deeply rewarding about knowing that you can provide for yourself, even if it's just a small part of your diet. And don't worry if you're not a natural green thumb. There are tons of resources out there to help beginners get started, from YouTube tutorials to gardening apps. But let's say you're not into gardening, that's cool too. Another way to build food security is through community-supported agriculture, CSA. These are programs where you subscribe to a local farm and get fresh, seasonal produce delivered to your door. It's a win-win. You support local farmers, get access to healthier food, and reduce your reliance on the global food supply chain, which, as we've discussed, is becoming increasingly fragile. And here's the thing. The more we rely on local food systems, the more resilient we all become. It's not just about what you grow or where you shop. It's about creating a network of local food producers that can keep us fed even when global supply chains break down. Now let's talk about investing in yourself. We've covered energy and food, but there's another resource that's just as important: you. In a world where technology is shifting, where jobs are becoming automated, and industries are being disrupted left and right, the most valuable asset you can invest in is your own skills. We're entering an era where traditional jobs may not be as secure as they once were. The rise of artificial intelligence, automation, and global outsourcing is already displacing millions of workers, and it's only going to accelerate. But here's the silver lining. While technology might eliminate some jobs, it's also creating new opportunities. The question is, are you prepared to seize those opportunities? So, how do you make sure you're not left behind? Upskilling and reskilling are critical. Look at the fields that are growing. Things like renewable energy, cybersecurity, data science, healthcare, and tech development. These are areas where demand is increasing, and there's a shortage of skilled workers. If you can position yourself in one of these industries, you're going to have an edge, even as the economy shifts. And here's the thing, this isn't just about going back to school or getting a degree. There are so many resources available now for online learning. Whether it's through platforms like Coursera, Udemy, or even YouTube, you can learn new skills without spending thousands of dollars. From coding to digital marketing, from 3D printing to permaculture, the options are endless. And the best part? Many of these skills are transferable, meaning they'll be valuable no matter what happens in the future. But let's be real, learning new skills is just one piece of the puzzle. Because as the world continues to change, we're going to see economic disruptions that most people aren't ready for. And if you want to truly be prepared, you need to start thinking about how to protect your wealth and financial security in an era of instability. All right, let's talk about money. We've discussed how the world is in transition, and with that comes financial volatility. Inflation, rising interest rates, unstable markets, and unpredictable geopolitical events are all creating an environment where traditional financial strategies might not work as well as they once did. The US dollar, once seen as the world's most stable currency, is facing challenges from inflation and a shifting global economy. And with alternatives like cryptocurrency and central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, on the rise, the financial landscape is evolving rapidly. So, how can you protect your wealth in these uncertain times? The first step is diversification. You've probably heard the saying, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." That's never been truer than right now. Diversifying your investments across stocks, bonds, real estate, commodities, and even cryptocurrencies is essential to spreading risk. Let's BR. If you're heavily invested in one asset class, say stocks, and the market takes a dive, your portfolio takes a huge hit. But if you've diversified, let's say you've got some real estate, maybe a bit of gold, and a small position in cryptocurrency, you're not as exposed to any single risk. And speaking of gold, let's talk about that for a second. Precious metals like gold and silver have been safe haven assets for centuries. When markets are volatile or when inflation is high, investors tend to flock to gold because it holds its value over time. Now, I'm not saying you should go all in on gold, but having a portion of your portfolio in precious metals can act as a hedge against economic instability. Another area worth considering? Cryptocurrency. Now, I know crypto is divisive. Some people swear by it, while others think it's a bubble. But the reality is, digital currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum are becoming a more prominent part of the global financial system. Institutions are investing, governments are regulating, and more people are using crypto for everyday transactions. While it's still volatile, having a small exposure to cryptocurrency could give you an edge as the financial landscape shifts. But financial security isn't just about what you invest in, it's also about how you manage your money. So stick around, because I'm about to share some critical strategies for budgeting, saving, and reducing debt in a world where inflation and interest rates are rising fast. Okay, let's talk about something that's not as exciting as crypto or gold, but just as important: budgeting and saving. In times of financial uncertainty, having a strong handle on your personal finances is crucial. And I know it sounds basic, but the reality is, most people don't have a clear understanding of where their money is going each month. If you don't already have a budget, now is the time to create one. Start by tracking your income and expenses for a few months to get a sense of your spending patterns. Look for areas where you can cut back, whether that's subscriptions you're not using, eating out less, or finding ways to lower your utility bills. Every dollar you save is a dollar you can put toward paying down debt or building an emergency fund. Speaking of emergency funds, if you don't have one, it's time to start. Having 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses in a savings account can be a lifesaver when unexpected expenses pop up. And in a world where jobs are becoming less stable, having that cushion is more important than ever. Let's talk about debt. In an environment where interest rates are rising, managing debt becomes even more critical. If you've got high-interest credit card debt, now is the time to focus on paying it down as quickly as possible. The longer you carry that debt, the more expensive it becomes. Consider consolidating your debt or refinancing if you can lock in a lower interest rate. And here's a pro tip. As interest rates rise, adjustable rate loans, like some mortgages, can become dangerous. If you're in an adjustable rate mortgage, it might be worth looking into refinancing to lock in a fixed rate before rates go even higher. Alright, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about how to diversify your investments, manage your budget, and reduce debt in a world of rising interest rates. But now, I want to shift gears a bit, because as much as financial strategies and investments are important, there's something even more valuable that we need to talk about: community. You see, one of the biggest lessons we can learn from history is that community matters. When times get tough, it's often the strength of our social networks, our families, friends, neighbors, and local communities that determine how well we get through it. In a world where the systems we've relied on for so long are starting to break down, building strong, resilient communities is more important than ever. Whether it's through local organizations, churches, or even online groups, having a support system in place can make all the difference. Here's the thing. When you're facing food shortages, energy blackouts, or economic instability, it's often your neighbors who will be the first to lend a hand, not some distant government agency. The more connected and engaged you are with your community, the more likely you are to get through crises intact. But community isn't just about leaning on others, it's also about contributing, sharing, and building something better. Whether it's through mutual aid networks, community gardens, or local energy cooperatives, there are countless ways to strengthen the bonds that hold us together. And as we move into a future that's less certain, those bonds are going to be our greatest asset. So, as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave you with this thought. The world is changing fast, and the systems we've come to rely on may not always be there to support us. But that doesn't mean we're powerless. By taking steps to secure your energy, your food, your finances, and your community, you can not only survive but thrive in this new world. The challenges ahead are real, but so are the opportunities. And as we move forward, I'm confident that if we stay informed, stay adaptable, and most importantly, stay connected, we can build a future that's not just sustainable, but better than anything that's come before. Thanks for tuning in to Mind Liberty. I'm Gus, and remember, while the world you were born into may be gone, that just means we have the chance to build something new. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts on how you're preparing for the future. Until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and stay free.